They grabbed the woman's wheelchair, laughing as her service dog barked in pain. Ranger, loyal, brave, and battered, tried to protect her until his body gave out. The men thought their father's money made them untouchable. But on that quiet trail by the lake, a stranger stopped running. A Navy SEAL on leave, about to remind them what real justice looks like. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support truly means the world to us. The afternoon air over Harbor Lake was still and heavy with the scent of pine, sunlight glimmering faintly across rippling water like glass brushed by gold. A soft wind moved through the reeds, carrying the murmur of waves against a weathered dock. Near its edge stood a small, fading cabin with a porch sagging under the weight of time. That was where Margaret Hayes, a widow in her late 60s, spent her days, alone, yet never truly lonely. Once an artist of local renown, Margaret now painted only for peace. Her silver hair, tied loosely behind her head, shimmered under the gentle sun. The lines on her face were not of defeat, but of quiet grace. Bound to her wheelchair since the accident that had claimed her husband's life 3 years before, she found solace in the rhythm of brushstrokes, turning silence into color. Beside her lay Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a proud, sturdy build and a thick double coat of silver and black. His amber eyes glowed with calm vigilance, a sentinel forged from loyalty. The faint white streak down his muzzle gave him the dignified air of a seasoned guardian. He understood Margaret's silence the way a soldier understands command, instinctively, without question. When she murmured, "We're getting there, aren't we, Ranger?" His tail thumped once against the wooden boards, deep and sure. The lake was quiet, until it wasn't. The distant growl of an approaching engine sliced through the peace. From the gravel road curving along the lake appeared a metallic blue sports car, sunlight flashing off its polished surface like a blade. Laughter, young and careless, carried across the water. Margaret's hand froze mid-stroke, her eyes narrowing with tired apprehension. The car stopped near her dock, and 3 young men emerged, Preston Langford, Cody Hill, and Ryan Tuck, each wrapped in wealth and arrogance. Preston, tall and broad-shouldered, had that sculpted kind of confidence that only money breeds. His blond hair was styled with studied disorder, his polo shirt fitted perfectly, his blue eyes glinting with practiced superiority. Cody was shorter, heavier, and eager to please, his smirk the kind of grin that depended on someone else's cruelty. Ryan, lanky and uncertain, hovered behind them, fidgeting with nervous energy, following because it was easier than resisting. "Well, look what we've got here," Preston drawled, smirking at the canvas. The lake's very own artist. Pretty picture, shame about the view. His gaze lingered on Margaret's wheelchair. Laughter followed, Cody's brash and Ryan's hesitant echo. Margaret straightened slightly, meeting his stare with quiet dignity. "This is private property. You need to leave," she said calmly. Preston raised an eyebrow. "Oh, we're just appreciating the art." He stepped closer, his cologne slicing through the scent of pine. "Nice dog you've got there." Ranger rose in one fluid motion, the fur along his back, lifting. He stood between them, head low, gaze steady on Preston's legs. Cody picked up a pebble and tossed it near the dog's paws. "Think he plays fetch?" he said, laughing when Ranger growled softly, a low, thunderous warning. "Easy, boy," Margaret whispered, reaching for her dog's collar, her fingers trembling. Preston grinned wider, mistaking restraint for weakness. "Relax, lady. We're just having fun." His words carried the cruelty of someone who found entertainment in discomfort. "Back off," Margaret said quietly, her voice hardening. "He's trained to protect." Preston's smile thinned. "Protect? From what? I'm just saying hello." He leaned down, voice mocking. "Sit, boy," Ranger barked, sharp and commanding, echoing across the still lake. Preston flinched, stumbling back as Cody laughed too loud. "Guess he doesn't like you, Press." The color drained from Preston's grin. He stooped, picked up a heavier stone, and hurled it. It struck Ranger's shoulder with a dull thud. The dog whimpered but did not retreat. Margaret's heart lurched. "Stop that!" she cried, but the only answer was laughter. Down the path a figure had stopped. Ethan Ward, tall and lean in black running gear, stood motionless, eyes fixed on the scene. At 39, Ethan carried the look of a man shaped by battle, strong jaw shadowed with stubble, dark hair cropped short, and gray eyes that had seen too much to ever fully rest. A Navy SEAL on leave, he had come to Harbor Springs seeking peace, but peace was a fragile thing. Even from afar, he could read every gesture, the mockery, the threat, the quiet fear in the woman's eyes, the restrained fury in the dog's stance. Something deep inside him shifted from calm to focus. Margaret's pulse quickened as Preston took another step forward. She saw in his grin not confidence, but emptiness, the cruelty of someone untouched by consequence. She reached for Ranger's head and whispered, "Stay with me, boy." The sunlight shimmered over the lake one last time, casting gold over the water before Preston raised his arm again, stone in hand. Ranger tensed, and from the distance Ethan began to move, silent, steady, deliberate, the ghost of a soldier awakened once more. The peace of Harbor Lake was over. The last light of afternoon faded behind the trees as the laughter of the three men sharpened into something cruel. Margaret Hayes steadied her hands on the armrest of her wheelchair and said firmly, "You've had your fun. Now leave." Preston Langford, tall and broad-shouldered, his blond hair styled in practiced carelessness, stepped forward with a smirk that oozed privilege. "You think you can tell me what to do?" he sneered, his blue eyes glinting with arrogance. He flicked his wrist, knocking the paintbrush from her hand. It hit the ground with a wet thud, blue paint splattering over the dirt. Ranger's growl cut through the air like thunder. The 6-year-old German shepherd moved in front of the wheelchair, his fur bristling, ears upright, muscles taut. Preston hesitated only for a moment before his grin widened. He drew back his leg and kicked. The sound was sharp. Ranger stumbled, a whimper caught in his throat. Margaret gasped, her voice cracking. "Stop it! Leave him alone!" Her eyes filled with tears as the men laughed. Cody Hill, heavy-set and red-faced, barked a laugh to impress his leader, while Ryan Tuck, lanky and uneasy, looked away, guilt flickering briefly before cowardice won. Preston brushed his shirt and said coldly, "He's just a dog, and she's just a woman in a chair." Then came another voice, low, steady, and controlled. "Step back." The three men turned. Ethan Ward was walking toward them, his black running shirt clinging to the lean muscle of a man built for endurance. His short, dark hair was damp with sweat, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and his gray eyes burned with quiet authority. "I said," he repeated, "step back." The command hung heavy in the air. Preston tried to sneer, but his voice faltered. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan didn't answer. He kept walking until the scar across his jaw caught the fading light. "Apologize to her," he said. Preston scoffed and moved forward, and in the next instant he was on the ground. The shift was fast, almost invisible. Ethan caught Preston's wrist, twisted, and brought him down, pinning him with one arm across the throat. Preston gasped, eyes wide, confusion replacing arrogance. Cody lunged forward, shouting, but Ethan pushed him back with a single precise kick. Ryan froze, hands raised, face pale. The whole scene lasted seconds, swift, silent, absolute. The air seemed to hold its breath as Ethan leaned closer, his voice even but edged with something dangerous. "If you ever come near her again, I won't be this gentle." The calm in his tone carried more threat than shouting ever could. Preston staggered up, clutching his neck. "You don't know who my father is," he rasped. Ethan's gray eyes stayed cold. "And he doesn't know who I am. Leave." They left. Tires screamed against gravel as the sports car sped off, the echo fading into the trees. Margaret sat frozen, her chest tight, eyes fixed on Ranger, who lay, trembling beside her. The only sound now was his ragged breathing. Ethan crouched and examined the dog, his hands firm but gentle. "You'll be okay, buddy," he murmured, checking the ribs and feeling the steady heartbeat. He glanced up at Margaret, who sat pale and tear-streaked. "There's a vet 5 miles east. Can you hold on?" She nodded silently. Ethan lifted Ranger carefully into the back of his pickup truck, every motion precise, efficient, respectful, as if handling something sacred. The drive was quiet. The sky turned from gold to indigo, the road stretching ahead like a dark ribbon. Margaret sat clutching Ranger's leash, her eyes distant. Ethan spoke softly. "You did well back there." She smiled faintly. "I used to think courage was loud," she said, "but maybe it's staying still when your hands shake." Ethan nodded, understanding the truth of it. He had lived too long in a world where fear shouted. Silence was far braver. At the small brick veterinary clinic, a woman in scrubs met them at the door. Dr. Linda Collins, a short, kind-faced woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled into a messy bun, opened the door wide. "Bring him in," she said calmly, leading them inside. Her voice was steady, her movements sure. Ethan recognized the poise of someone who had seen crisis before and never lost her composure. Margaret waited quietly as Dr. Collins examined Ranger, her fingers twitching on her lap, her heart straining at every soft whine from her companion. Ethan stood by the window, scanning the empty parking lot, a reflex he didn't realize he still had. When Dr. Collins returned, wiping her hands on a towel, she smiled gently. "No fractures, just bruises. He's lucky." Margaret exhaled shakily, tears of relief forming again. Ethan gave her arm a reassuring pat. "He's tough," he said. Ranger, lying on a blanket, wagged his tail once, as if to agree. The three of them stood in the warm light of the small clinic, the night outside pressing quietly against the windows. For a brief moment, there was peace again. Outside, under the first stars, Ethan walked Margaret and Ranger to his truck. She turned to him, her voice soft but steady. "You didn't have to stop." Ethan looked out toward the horizon, his eyes tired but clear. "Ma'am," he said, "after everything I've seen, it's the not stopping that keeps a man awake." They drove in silence toward the cabin, headlights cutting through the mist. In the back seat, Ranger's breathing grew steady again. For the first time in years, Margaret felt safe, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt like a soldier who had finally found something worth protecting. Morning came quietly to Harbor Springs, the light soft and pale over the lake. Dew clung to the grass, and the cabin by the shore stood peaceful again, though its silence now carried the faint echo of yesterday's violence. Inside, Margaret Hayes was seated by the window, her sketchpad on her lap, her gaze unfocused. The memory of Preston's kick still haunted her, the dull thud, the helplessness in her chest. But it was tempered by gratitude. She looked toward the yard, where Ethan Ward was kneeling by the fence, tightening a crooked post with the same calm precision he had shown in a fight. His jacket hung on a nearby chair, revealing strong forearms marked by old scars, proof of years where his hands had done far harsher work than repairing wood. There was something almost reverent in the way he moved, as though fixing things was his way of silencing the noise left behind by war. Ranger, still sore from the injury, lay in the grass nearby, watching Ethan intently. His coat shimmered under the morning sun, silver-black fur rippling gently each time he breathed. The dog's amber eyes followed Ethan's every movement with unspoken loyalty, ears twitching when the hammer struck the nail. Margaret called softly from the porch. "You don't have to do all that, Ethan." He turned, wiping his hands on a rag, the faintest smile tracing his lips. "I know, but I need to keep busy." His voice carried warmth beneath its steady tone, though behind it was the quiet weariness of a man who had known too many restless mornings. After lunch, Ethan drove Ranger to Dr. Linda Collins's clinic for a recheck. The little brick building looked even smaller in the daylight, framed by climbing ivy and the soft hum of bees. Dr. Collins greeted them with the same tired kindness, her silver hair escaping from its bun. "He's healing beautifully," she said, gently pressing Ranger's shoulder. "You take good care of him." Ethan nodded. "He's not mine. He belongs to someone braver." Dr. Collins looked between him and Margaret, who had come along this time, her eyes soft behind her glasses. There was no need for more words. The quiet between them said enough. Meanwhile, far across town, in the top-floor office of the Langford Financial Building, another conversation was unfolding. Richard Langford, Preston's father, sat behind an imposing mahogany desk that matched the weight of his reputation. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with silver hair swept neatly back, his suit crisp, his cufflinks glinting under the dim light. His face, lined by years of calculated deals, carried a look of perpetual disapproval. He had built the town's largest bank from a small inheritance and was used to getting what he wanted. Now he wanted silence. "I won't have our name dragged through the dirt," he said coldly, tossing a newspaper aside. Its headline read, "Local Heir Involved in Altercation by the Lake. Find whoever this man is and make this disappear." Across the desk sat Arthur Blake, the Langford family's lawyer and fixer. Arthur was in his mid-40s, slim, with dark hair that always looked slightly wet, as if from nervous sweat or too much hair gel. Behind his polite smile was a mind built for manipulation. He adjusted his tie and leaned forward. "You can't silence everyone, Richard. People are talking. A stranger comes to town, beats your son, and suddenly half of Harbor Springs is whispering about justice." His tone was smooth, practiced, but his eyes gleamed with calculation. Richard's hand tightened around his glass. "Then we'll teach him a lesson." Arthur tilted his head, voice dropping. "If you want to hurt a man like that, don't go for him. Go for what he protects." At that same hour, Ethan and Margaret sat on the porch, sharing a late afternoon coffee. The light had turned golden again, soft against the water. Margaret broke the silence first. "You remind me of my husband," she said quietly. Ethan looked up from the mug in his hands, expression curious but kind. "He was a teacher," she continued, smiling faintly. "He believed that broken things could still have purpose. Even people." Ethan didn't answer right away. He watched the sun dip lower and said softly, "Sometimes it's easier to fix a fence than yourself." His tone carried the weight of memory, something buried beneath years of duty and loss. Margaret nodded, sensing that there were stories in him she might never hear. And that was all right. From a distance, the faint sound of an approaching car broke their conversation. Ethan's instinct sharpened, his posture straightened, his eyes flicked toward the dirt road leading to the cabin. It was only the mail truck, rolling past in a cloud of dust, but he didn't relax until it disappeared beyond the trees. Margaret noticed. "You're always watching," she said. "Old habits," Ethan replied simply. "Some habits keep you alive." That night, as darkness settled over the lake, Harbor Springs seemed peaceful again, but the storm had already begun elsewhere. In his office, Arthur Blake typed an email to one of Richard Langford's men, a name that appeared often in police reports but never in court records. His fingers paused over the keys, a smile curling at the edge of his mouth. "Let's see how strong our hero really is," he muttered. Back at the cabin, Margaret turned off the lights, and Ethan stood by the window, looking out across the water. Ranger slept at his feet, breathing slow and steady, his chest rising with the rhythm of trust. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the comfort of belonging, something fragile, something worth guarding. He didn't know that forces in town were already setting plans in motion, but for tonight, Harbor Lake was calm, and the man they shouldn't have provoked stood watch in silence. The night hung heavy over Harbor Lake, the mist creeping low across the still water, while the moon hid behind a veil of thin clouds. Inside the old cabin, Margaret Hayes slept in her wheelchair near the faint glow of a dying fire. The air was warm and still, filled with the scent of pine and old paint. Beside her, Ranger, the silver-black German shepherd, breathed in steady rhythm, his body curled protectively at her side. It was close to midnight when the quiet cracked open. First the crunch of gravel, then footsteps too careful to belong to anyone welcome. Ranger's ears flicked upright, his muscles tightening before the window shattered with a burst of glass. 3 masked men slipped inside, their flashlights sweeping across the room like knives of light. Margaret woke to the sound, heart pounding as shadows darted across her walls. "Who's there?" she called, voice trembling. The nearest man turned, his black mask painted with red streaks like scars. "Stay quiet, lady," he muttered, voice sharp with youth and fear. Ranger exploded into motion, barking with fury, a blur of muscle and teeth. One intruder swung a metal rod, striking the dog's ribs. Ranger yelped, but stayed standing, his growl low and guttural. "Find the safe," another hissed, tearing through drawers, scattering canvases and paint. Then, with a spray can, the leader painted words in crimson streaks that dripped down the wall like blood. "Next time, it's the dog." Margaret screamed as a gloved hand shoved her chair, her head hit the wood. Everything went black. Moments later, headlights cut through the trees. Ethan Ward's pickup truck rolled down the dirt road, its tires grinding over gravel. He had been returning from town with repair supplies when he noticed the flickering light inside the cabin. Instinct took over. He stopped the engine, stepped out silently, and approached the porch. The front door was ajar. Inside, chaos waited. Broken furniture, shards of glass, and the smear of red across the wall. Margaret lay unconscious in her chair. Ranger was down beside her, breathing fast, wounded but alive. Ethan knelt, 2 fingers to Margaret's neck, pulse steady. "You're okay," he whispered, though the words were more for himself. He examined the dog's bruised side and stroked his head. "You did good, boy." Then his gaze lifted to the message on the wall, and his expression hardened. His voice dropped to a quiet murmur. "All right. My turn." By dawn, the cabin no longer looked the same. Ethan moved through it like a soldier rebuilding a perimeter, focused, silent, unstoppable. He repaired locks, replaced broken glass, reinforced the doors with steel brackets from his truck. Small black sensors appeared in the corners, each one placed with deliberate precision. The rhythm of hammering and quiet motion filled the morning. When Margaret awoke, her head bandaged and the scent of fresh coffee in the air, she saw Ethan crouched near the window, tightening a screw on a small camera. "You're safe now," he said without looking back. "But they'll try again." Later that morning, as Margaret rested with Ranger at her feet, Ethan stepped outside with a satellite phone, an old military-grade device scratched from years of use. He dialed quickly. A woman's voice answered, calm but edged with dry humor. "Ward? I was wondering when you'd crawl out of whatever hole you're hiding in." It was Marla Jensen, a former Navy cyber operations specialist turned private security consultant. She was in her late 30s, tall, lean, sharp-eyed. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, was tied loosely behind her head. Years spent chasing digital ghosts had given her a wry tone and unshakable focus. "Got a favor," Ethan said. "Need a trace on a plate number. Fast." Marla's keyboard clattered in the background. "Send it over," she replied. "And Ward, what did you get yourself into this time?" Ethan's eyes flicked toward the red words still staining the wall. "The kind of trouble that hates daylight." Minutes passed before Marla's voice returned, quieter. "Got it. Vehicle registered to Preston Langford." A silence stretched between them. "The same Preston?" she asked. "Yeah," Ethan said flatly. "He's not acting alone." "You want me to dig deeper?" "No," Ethan said after a pause. "Not yet. Just keep watch. If they move again, I'll handle it." Evening came soft and gray. Margaret sat on the porch wrapped in a wool blanket, her hands clasped over Ranger's head. The dog leaned against her leg, his eyes alert, though his ribs still sore. Ethan stood nearby, scanning the tree line, his expression unreadable. "They won't stop," Margaret said quietly. "People like that never do." Ethan nodded once, the muscles in his jaw flexing. "Then we'll stop them first." The sky rumbled with distant thunder, the lake reflecting streaks of dark silver. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the wind moved, cool, warning, alive. That night, when darkness returned and the cabin lights went out, it no longer stood defenseless. Cameras blinked faintly in the corners, motion sensors whispered against the wood, and on the porch stood Ethan Ward, motionless, calm, eyes fixed on the forest. Inside, Margaret and Ranger slept beneath his protection. The man they shouldn't have provoked was no longer hiding from his past. He was preparing for what would come next. Morning rose quietly over Harbor Lake, its surface smooth as glass, pretending peace. But inside the small cabin, Ethan Ward saw through the illusion. He had spent the long hours before dawn reviewing footage from the security cameras he'd set up. 3 masked figures, dark clothes, the silver flash of a spray can painting threats across the wall. The images were blurred, but they were proof. Across from him at the kitchen table sat Margaret Hayes, her pale face drawn, the printed stills trembling faintly in her hands. Beside her, Ranger, still bandaged, breathed slowly with his head resting on her knee. "It's time," Ethan said quietly. "We take this to the police." She hesitated, fear flickering behind her eyes, then nodded. It was the kind of decision made when someone had nothing left to lose. The Harbor Springs Police Department looked neat from the outside. Red brick walls, polished brass handles, an American flag fluttering out front. Inside, however, the air smelled stale, thick with the weight of bureaucracy. Behind the front desk sat Sergeant Frank Howard, a man who had long outlived his sense of duty. He was in his mid-50s, his belly straining against the buttons of his shirt, his thinning gray hair slicked back as though still trying to impress someone. His expression carried that weary blend of cynicism and control that comes from years of doing favors for the powerful. When Ethan and Margaret entered, Howard greeted them with a faint smile that never reached his eyes. "Morning. What seems to be the problem?" His tone made it sound like they were inconveniencing him. Ethan laid a USB drive on the counter. "Evidence of a break-in," he said evenly. 3 suspects, masked. Vehicle, blue sedan, plate 793XQ. Howard took the drive, inserted it into his computer, and began typing at an agonizing pace. The glow of the monitor flickered across his face, reflecting something smug. After a long pause, he leaned back in his chair and said simply, "Doesn't exist." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Check again." Howard shrugged, still smirking. "No such plate in the system. Maybe your little hacker friend got it wrong." His eyes met Ethan's with that quiet challenge of a man who knows he can hide behind a badge. The moment stretched, tense and unspoken. Margaret leaned forward, her voice trembling but clear. "Sergeant, please. They broke into my home. They attacked me, hurt my dog. You can't just ignore that." Howard's fingers tapped on the desk, disinterested. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Without a valid registration or IDs, there's nothing we can do. I'll file a note, but that's it." He gave a slow, rehearsed sigh, then added, "The Langfords are respectable people. Maybe best not to make this bigger than it is?" Ethan's jaw tightened, his knuckles pale against the counter. "Respectable?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "Good men don't hire cowards to beat a woman." Howard's fake smile faltered for just a second. Then he clicked the mouse, closed the file, and said, "That'll be all, Mr. Ward." The words were a dismissal and a warning. Outside, the air felt colder. Margaret's shoulders slumped as she whispered, "He's not going to help us, is he?" Ethan shook his head. "He just told us who he works for." They walked back to the truck in silence, the betrayal burning more than fear. Ranger limped alongside them, his head turning at every sound, the embodiment of vigilance. As the truck rolled down the empty road, Ethan's mind churned. Howard's name, Langford's reach, the system that allowed rot to wear a badge. Corruption, he knew, didn't start with the powerful. It started with those who obeyed them. By evening the sky turned gray, heavy with the scent of rain. A black sedan rolled up the gravel driveway, its engine too smooth for a small-town visitor. Ethan stepped onto the porch, silent, watchful. The man who emerged was sharply dressed, Arthur Blake, the Langford family's lawyer. He was in his early 40s, tall and slim, his black hair perfectly parted, his skin pale as polished marble. Everything about him radiated wealth and control. His smile, when it came, was well-practiced and meaningless. "Mr. Ward," he said smoothly, his voice like warm poison. "And Mrs. Hayes. I represent the Langford family, and I'm here to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding." He opened his briefcase and drew out a white envelope. "Inside is a check," he continued, "enough to cover your repairs and medical costs. In exchange, you sign this, an agreement that none of this ever happened. Simple, clean, civilized." Margaret stared at the envelope, her face pale. "And if I don't?" she asked. Blake's polite smile sharpened. "Then we file charges. Your dog attacked my client's son. There will be witnesses. And, ma'am, you'll lose your home before this goes to trial." The air around them thickened. Ethan's gaze hardened, the veteran in him surfacing. "You've said enough," he murmured. Blake straightened his tie, meeting Ethan's stare. "Think carefully, Mr. Ward. Some fights can't be won." Ethan took one step closer, his voice low and calm. "Then it's a good thing I'm not fighting for myself." He closed the door in the lawyer's face. The sound of Blake's engine faded into the distance, leaving only the whisper of wind through the pines. Inside, Margaret sat at the table, tears streaking her cheeks. "They'll destroy us," she whispered. Ethan crouched beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "They'll try," he said, "but they've already made one mistake. They think fear wins." His eyes turned toward the window, where the lake reflected the gathering storm. Lightning flickered far away, silent for now. He knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. This time, when the thunder came, he'd be ready. Night fell over Harbor Lake like a curtain drawn tight. The water was still, silvered by the faint moonlight, while the cabin on the shore stood in perfect darkness. Inside, Ethan Ward sat motionless, his silhouette blending with the shadows. Every light was off. Every breath was measured. On the table beside him lay a flashlight, a roll of nylon cord, and a handgun he hoped he wouldn't need. Earlier that evening, he had made his preparations with military precision. Margaret Hayes and Ranger were no longer here. He had personally driven them to the countryside, to the home of one of her oldest friends, Reverend Grace Miller, a retired female pastor known for her quiet strength and compassion. Grace, a woman in her 60s with silver hair always tied in a low bun, had welcomed them without question, her calm presence like a prayer against fear. Margaret had hesitated to leave, her hand trembling against Ethan's arm. "You'll be alone," she'd whispered. Ethan had only replied, "Not really." Now that promise echoed in the silence. He had set up small cameras and motion sensors around the property, each calibrated to alert his phone with the slightest movement. The night air smelled of rain and pine, and somewhere far off a loon cried across the water. Ethan's eyes never left the window. His mind was clear, calm, as if all the noise of the world had narrowed down to this, waiting for men who thought they were hunters to step into a trap. Near midnight his phone buzzed once. A faint vibration, no sound. Motion detected. Back entrance. Ethan's pulse slowed rather than quickened. He rose from the chair, moving without a sound. The training came back to him like muscle memory from another life. Shift your weight on the outer edges of your boots. Control your breathing. Use darkness as your ally. The latch turned. A soft creak of hinges broke the silence. 3 figures slipped into the kitchen, flashlights slicing across the wooden walls. Their whispers were harsh, muffled by their masks. One of them, tall, broad, wearing an expensive jacket, moved like he owned the place. Preston Langford. Behind him stumbled Cody Hill, heavyset and clumsy, already sweating under the mask, and Ryan Tuck, thinner, jittery, eyes darting nervously even in the dark. "Just grab something, make it look like a robbery," Preston hissed. "We're not here to kill anyone." But the tension in his voice betrayed fear. He was trying to convince himself more than the others. Ryan swallowed hard. "Press, maybe we should—" "Shut up!" Preston snapped. He turned toward the back door, just as Ethan moved. The first strike was silent. Cody barely had time to turn before Ethan's arm looped around his neck, pulling him backward into a chokehold that cut off sound and breath. Cody struggled, but years of combat had taught Ethan the economy of strength. Within seconds, the man's body went limp and slid quietly to the floor. Ryan spun, flashlight jerking wildly. Ethan stepped forward, disarmed him with a twist, and kicked his legs out. Ryan hit the floor hard, gasping. In 2 swift motions, Ethan bound his wrists with the nylon cord and gagged him with a strip of cloth. Preston froze. For a heartbeat, he stood motionless, chest heaving, realizing just how wrong things had gone. "Don't," Ethan said quietly. But Preston ran. He bolted toward the front door, his expensive shoes slipping on the wooden planks. Ethan caught him before he reached the handle. The impact sent Preston sprawling, the breath knocked from his chest. In one fluid motion, Ethan pinned him face down, his knee pressing firmly between the man's shoulder blades. The SEAL's calm returned. No anger, just discipline. He turned Preston over, grabbed him by the collar, and forced him to look up into the light of the single lamp Ethan now switched on. The glow illuminated Preston's sweat-slicked face, his blue eyes wide with humiliation and terror. "You know," Ethan said evenly, voice low and cold, "I've seen men kill for a scrap of bread. I've seen fathers die so their kids could live another hour. But you?" He tightened his grip, forcing Preston to meet his gaze. "You hurt a woman who couldn't walk because you thought it'd make your father proud." Preston's lips trembled. "You don't understand." "No," Ethan interrupted. "I understand perfectly. You think power makes you untouchable. Tonight, you learn what happens when it doesn't." From the corner of the room, Ryan let out a muffled sob through his gag. Cody groaned, barely conscious. Ethan stood, letting Preston drop to the floor. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed calmly. 911, he said when the operator answered, his tone controlled and unhurried. "This is Ethan Ward. I've just detained 3 intruders at 42 Lakeside Drive. You'll want to send a car, and a few honest officers if you can find any." By the time the sirens appeared faintly in the distance, Ethan had turned on every light in the cabin. Preston sat bound on the floor beside his two friends, faces pale under the glare. The security cameras captured everything: the break-in, the confrontation, the arrests that followed. When the officers arrived, one of them paused as Ethan handed over the footage. "They were caught in the act," Ethan said simply. "Everything's recorded." As the police led the men outside, Preston turned one last time, eyes burning with anger and shame. "You think this is over?" he spat. Ethan stood in the doorway, the calm of a man who'd already survived worse. "No," he said, "but now the world gets to see who you really are." He closed the door behind them, the echo of sirens fading into the night. The morning broke over Harbor Springs with a golden stillness, the lake glimmering like a sheet of glass beneath the soft blush of dawn. Mist hovered low above the water, curling through the pines, while the town, usually slow to wake, buzzed with quiet shock. The story had spread faster than the sunrise. Headlines filled every local paper. "War veteran stops elite vandals, saves elderly woman from violent attack." It was everywhere, on radios, in cafe whispers, and in the glances people exchanged as they walked down Main Street. The once invisible cabin by the lake had become the center of a storm that no one could ignore. In the small diner near the harbor, old fishermen read the front page aloud, while truckers shook their heads in disbelief. "Ku Lin Jack Nhiem." The words rolled with weight in every language and accent the town carried. Ethan Ward's name wasn't mentioned. He had refused to give it, but everyone knew who he was. The man who had moved to Harbor Springs to disappear had instead become its quiet hero. The same police who had once looked the other way were now under investigation. Chief Wallace, the town's police chief, a heavy man with iron-gray hair and a reputation for keeping in Langford's favor, had been suspended pending review. The department's walls were cracking from the inside, and for the first time in years, people dared to speak openly about corruption. At the courthouse downtown, Richard Langford, impeccably dressed but visibly aged overnight, stood before the flash of cameras. The banker's silver hair was perfectly combed, but the confidence that once defined him had drained away, replaced by a tight-lipped fury. Reporters surrounded him like crows, shouting questions about the assault, about his son Preston's arrest, about Sergeant Howard's sudden early retirement. Langford didn't answer. Behind him walked Arthur Blake, the lawyer, still immaculate in his dark suit, his face expressionless. His words to the press were brief and rehearsed. "The Langford family trusts the justice system will reveal the truth." But even his voice lacked its usual arrogance. He knew the tide had turned. Back at the lake, life returned slowly to its gentle rhythm. The cabin, though scarred, stood whole again. Inside, Margaret Hayes moved through the morning light with the grace of someone who had survived too much to be hurried by anything. Her wheelchair rolled softly over the wooden floor as she prepared a basket with care: fresh bread, a slice of her apple pie, and 2 steaming cups of coffee. Outside, Ranger trotted across the grass, his silver-black coat glinting under the sun. His ribs had healed, but a faint scar remained, a mark of loyalty etched into fur. When he caught sight of Margaret, his tail wagged hard enough to shake his whole body. "You're just showing off now," she said with a smile, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. A short walk away, Ethan sat by the edge of the lake, elbows resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He looked older that morning, not from years, but from the kind of weariness that only fades after a battle hard won. His short, dark hair caught the light, and a faint shadow of stubble traced the sharp line of his jaw. He had spent the last few days cooperating with the new investigators who had come from Traverse City, men and women who still remembered what justice was supposed to look like. Every night after they left, he sat outside, watching the stars reflected in the water, trying to remember the last time he'd felt peace. Margaret rolled toward him now, the basket on her lap, Ranger trotting loyally beside her. "You've been up since before sunrise again," she said softly. Ethan turned, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Habit," he said. "Old soldiers don't sleep well when things are too quiet." She smiled, placing the basket beside him. "Then maybe this will help." He took the coffee she offered, the warmth steady in his hands. For a long moment they said nothing. The air smelled of pine and fresh rain, and the world felt almost clean again. Finally Margaret spoke, her voice gentle but sure. "You didn't just save me, Ethan. You saved this town. From fear. From silence." Ethan met her gaze, a faint sadness in his smile. "I didn't save anyone, ma'am. I just stopped running." Ranger circled once and settled at Ethan's feet, his amber eyes glowing like embers against the golden light. The lake rippled softly as the wind picked up, scattering thin clouds across the sky. Somewhere behind them the town stirred, a place shaken but awake. Margaret looked out across the water. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said. Ethan nodded, watching the reflection of light move across the waves. "Yeah," he murmured. "Justice usually is, quiet, steady, and hard to notice unless you're looking for it." The sun climbed higher, burning the mist away. In that stillness, the horrors of the past days felt distant, almost dreamlike. Ethan breathed deeply, feeling for the first time in a long while that he could stay. As Ranger lifted his head toward the sound of distant gulls and the wind swept across the lake, Ethan smiled faintly. The fight was over, but its meaning lingered like the dawn, soft, radiant, and unyielding. Sometimes God's miracles don't come with thunder. They come through ordinary people who choose kindness when the world turns cold. Ethan didn't just save a life. He reminded a town that faith and courage still exist. If this story touched your heart, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to keep the light spreading. May God bless everyone watching. May He give you peace, strength, and the faith to see miracles in your everyday life.